feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, I like your new background. It looks like you're a
Thank
talking
you.
head for a TLC insert.
Yeah, if I sound or look different today, it is because I am sitting crisscross applesauce at my parents' house. Not in my childhood home. I'm in my parents' new home, which was my grandparents' home before that. So technically, I'm in my grandparents' home. I'm in the spare bedroom. It's a snowmageddon outside. We're recording this pretty late just due to the chaos of the Christmas season in general. But a little chaotic recording for a chaotic movie, Eric, because today we are reviewing Damien Chazelle's Babylon, which is in theaters now for everyone to watch. Eric, how are you on this fine, snowy, windy morning/afternoon?
I'm good, Matt. It honest, we were talking before. It doesn't feel like Christmas is just a couple days away as we're recording this, and even watching some trashy '80s, late '80s, early '90s holiday centric horror movies didn't even get me into the spirit of things. So, it's one of those years where it kind of feels as though 2022 kind of came and went in a lot of ways, and even with this holiday, it's kind of like it's very passe in a way. So I don't know how you feel about it overall, though.
Yeah, I was talking with my sister on the drive up to my parents' place, and I've got here a couple days early because of this giant storm that's happening in most of the U.S. and Canada, at least on the eastern side. But yeah, we were both saying that it doesn't. I don't know. I guess with the pandemic and just getting older and like the years go by quicker, and then you get to, and our winters are weird in the sense that I feel like they don't start until January sometimes, but it is snowy outside, which makes it feel a little bit more Christmassy. I haven't watched many Christmas movies this year. Nevis and I went to Winter Fest at Canada's Wonderland last weekend, which kind of got us in the Christmas spirit a little bit. We were talking about the Muppet Christmas Muppet Family Christmas and Muppet Christmas Carol. We've had a feud back and forth on
Yes.
Twitter about that, but I think it will kick in tomorrow, Christmas Eve. My mom always has like a Christmas Eve gathering. It just with this weather, I don't know if very many people will be able to make it down to Newcastle to stop in, but I'm getting into the Christmas spirit. It's starting to feel like that. I mean, sitting at my parents' house last night and watching Christmas specials with them, like the Muppets one, like Peanuts. We put on the AMC Plus exclusive Christmas with the Campbells, which has Justin Long, and uh, it's basically a satire of the Hallmark movies, but it's like a raunchy R-rated version of them. I only watched about half of it before I went to bed, but my mom loves that kind of crap, and I was like, "Oh, you should put this on." And this is turning into a normal podcast, not Babylon. We'll get there, I promise.
There's a lot
But
going on, so
yeah, but I thought it was Justin Long was funny because he's putting on that kind of classic, like, hometown boy that wears plaid and has a dog and he puts on this like kind of southern accent, but like cowboy accent, and he just kept cracking me up. But the
Well, he's
movie
actually
itself is like,
his actual real life performance is the
yeah,
character from Barbarian. So he's
yeah,
playing the character
exactly,
from Barbarian, playing the character in this satire of
yeah.
Hallmark movies.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but enough about Christmas. Enough about, I mean, I guess this movie's coming out at Christmas, so at least it is a little relevant. But let's get into it. Damien Chazelle's Babylon, a movie we saw a couple weeks ago or a month ago, Eric. I
A
forget
month
when we
ago,
saw
I
it.
think we saw it at the
Yeah.
beginning of December or mid-December for awards consideration. We saw it at the Tiff Bell Lightbox with a Q&A followed afterwards that Cameron Bailey moderated with writer-director Damien Chazelle. And there's a lot to discuss here. It's a strangely divisive movie
Yeah.
between not only audiences
Polarizing for sure.
not only between critics and audiences, but even between critics themselves. Some people applaud it for the audacious swings it's taking, and some people kind of feel that it's a little bit redundant after the first act, or is basically style over substance in a lot of ways. But it's going to be a fun one to discuss, and I think it's a movie that both of us enjoyed. And what I'm most surprised with is how much you love the movie, because you liked La La Land a lot, but you also have been on record talking about that maybe Damien Chazelle's kind of a hit or miss filmmaker for you, especially with
It's
you
one on,
liked
one off for
Whiplash,
me. Yeah.
but you didn't love it, and then
Yeah.
First Man you could take or leave for what it is, but this really connected with you.
Yeah, and I think, there are some connections with La La Land, so I guess that kind of makes sense, which we'll get into a bit later. Um, but yeah, you know what? He's been hit or miss for me. Like, I remember seeing Whiplash after the hype from Sundance all the way down to when it came out. And I remember being kind of underwhelmed with it. And then I've gone back and rewatched Whiplash and appreciate it a bit more, and do enjoy that movie and the performances especially. But this guy loves jazz, that's for sure, though. So
He's jazzed, all right.
after, do you like jazz? I absolutely love La La Land. First Man, I should give another shot because of the circumstances where we saw that, where we were like fourth row at Cinesphere watching it in IMAX beside Denis Villeneuve.
We
and
were too
like,
close to Denny.
and I kept, one, wanting to see Denis Villeneuve's reaction, and two, that movie made me nauseous, just because we were sitting so close to the screen, and the cinematography in that movie being weirdly shaky camish at times.
And also in close
But
up and extreme close up, right?
yeah,
Like, it was very personal and very intimate, but it was more restrained and introspective than Babylon. It almost feels like Babylon is, on one side of the spectrum of Damien
and First
Chazelle's,
Man is on the
filmography, and
other.
then
Yeah.
yeah, and it's almost like a response. It's like, okay, I made this kind of more internalized movie,
Now let's
depicting.
fucking smash you in the face with the elephant shit.
Yeah, and that's only in
Literally.
the first 30 minutes, like
and
literally in the first act, basically.
and I've said this is kind of the year of, maximalist filmmaking isn't necessarily like a new thing, but this year especially, I just feel like, and you've said this, like maybe post pandemic, post kind of whatever the reason is, that some filmmakers just want to fucking throw it all out there. And I feel like this is one of those movies, and we got that this year with Everything Everywhere All at Once, Babylon, RRR, even Top Gun Maverick to an extent.
And
I
Elvis
think
as
can be,
well.
and Elvis is up there. And those movies are always going to be polarizing, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, Top Gun Maverick's maybe on the safer side of things, where it is just an enjoyable blockbuster. But what all those other movies that I mentioned, very much are those love them or hate them kind of movies. Like, you're going to be on its wavelength, or you're not going to be, and you're going to know that pretty early in the movie. Like, I tried watching this with my wife the other night, and 15 minutes in, she was like, I don't want to watch this. And I was like, you know what? I understand. And like, it's one of those movies where you don't even really want to argue with people if they don't like it, because I think in any of those, if it's just not your cup of tea, it's not going to be your cup of tea. I personally absolutely
A
loved
cup
this
of
movie.
Coke, let's
Okay.
be real.
Yeah,
A
yeah.
cup of tea.
Just a splash of Coke in your face. Yeah, I when watching this, it reminded me of something like Boogie Nights, or um it just this weird, like, sleazy cousin to La La Land. And that's why I kind of really vibed with it. Like, I liked taking this look of just this debaucherous, kind of vile, crude look at filmmaking in the 1920s, and that transition from silent films to talkies, and just this character piece on, this group of actors, and group of actors,
Industry
but then also
figures
just
and
industry figures,
producers,
yeah, and things like
writers,
that.
yeah.
And I love movies about Hollywood too, which Hollywood loves movies about Hollywood. But like, I love a bombastic, stylish, kind of out there movie if I'm on its wavelength, and this one got me from the start. And I think the score is incredible. I think the cinematography is like lush and and has depth to it, and you can tell like he shot it on film, and you can tell, and it just which I think was a good call for this movie.
Yeah,
And
Linus Sandgren is really good with texture and kind of creating a sort, not only just an atmosphere to the time, but also there's something about the colors of this movie
yeah,
that portray the period really well, and it kind of
really
feels
really
like
well.
you're completely invested in it. But yeah, again, if you're not on this movie's wavelength in that first act,
It's gonna
uh you're
be
you're gonna
a
feel those
hard to
3 hours
watch. Yeah,
in what, like 10 minutes or so, or 8
yeah.
minutes. So
But
it's
it
a
was
lot to
this
take
both
in.
fuck you to Hollywood. It's also a love letter to Hollywood and movies, I guess more so than
As people
Hollywood.
are saying, like,
And
it's a love letter to cinema, the
yeah,
cliched.
which I
So
know, but it's showing like I love making movies. I love the art of making movies, and but this Hollywood system has been fucked for a long time, and like and the people that it chews up and spits out, and both in the industry side and on screen and everything in between. And I think this movie does a good job of in a sensational kind of way, a heightened way, showing you kind of what it was like and what it still is. And I think, I think it's both just uh, an engaging, wild, not like crime drama, but it gets to those points. It's just like it's literally everything in
it
the
has
kitchen sink,
thriller
and I think
elements
that's
to
like,
it. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what the stuff that I was not expecting. And I feel like it is long. It's grueling at times because of kind of what it tackles and how it tackles it. But I think Margot Robbie is excellent. I think Diego Calva is fantastic. I think Brad Pitt is
Brad
perfectly
Pitt.
cast. Perfectly
That's his
cast as
media
this
team,
kind
Brad
of
Pitt.
yeah. I love Gene Smart. I like Lee. Toby Maguire's fantastic. Spike Jones, and like all these people that are kind of thrown into this movie, that like the Spike Jones character especially, just being like, you're either going to be in on this or you're not, and like you're either just going to fucking hate this or you're going to love it. And it is just kind of one of those coin toss movies, and depending on if you like those other movies that I talked about, you might. But I also know people who like those other movies that hated this as well, right? So yeah, I really liked it as this kind of debaucherous step cousin to La La Land. Like the score, Justin Hurwitz's score, I think, is absolutely incredible. But at times you're like, this sounds like his La La Land score, and like multiple times throughout it. But then Voodoo Mama is such, like, I've been listening to it over and over and over again. That one piece of score from this movie, I think it's a wild, absolute blast, and it's one of my favorite movies of the year. I said this on our show last week, but I really really loved it.
Yeah, and I think, like, you mentioned the cliched saying that it's a love letter to cinema. I think the other cliched saying that I think is somewhat apt in this discussion is that when it comes to a thing that you love, especially an industry that makes the things that you consume on a weekly, daily, monthly basis, that's for entertainment, you have to take the good and the bad and what's kind of given to you, and accept them both. You can't simply erase the horrible aspects of the Hollywood industry as it kind of was moving in its infancy. um you mentioned Boogie Nights. Like, I do feel that the elevator pitch, when he was kind of working on this, was probably like,
Boogie
it's
Nights and
basically,
La La Land.
well, Boogie Nights and Singing in the Rain, right? Like, it
Singing in the
feels
Rain.
like
Yeah, that's a good point,
those
which is very
those are the
literally
two intersections. But I want to go to the Boogie Nights thing, because I think there's a lot of comparisons you can make to both of those
immediately what I
movies.
thought. Yeah, with the starting up fresh in the industry, kind of like,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no. That's the perfect kind of starting point, because in the beginning of Boogie Nights, the porn industry, the adult industry, has already been established. It's in the 1970s, so you're going from 70s to 80s. In this, you're going from 20s to 30s. The invention of video changed the adult landscape, because adult films were released theatrically, especially in New York at that period, so you could see them on film. But then when the 80s came into play, you had, the VHS era starting to creep in, so it made things more easy to distribute and what have you. With Babylon, you have the silent era transitioning into talkies, and how sound played a pivotal role in changing the way that people watched and listened to movies, and not just had a piano player adding in the score live as you're watching the film. And that also creates redundancies, right? Like the feeling of like you're inadequate to adapt to the next stage. And then the other
Mhm.
thing that Damien Chazelle does, that Paul Thomas Anderson does a lot in his movies, and not just Boogie Nights, is that he'll take historical figures or references and bring them into his movies, but he'll sort of add sort of layers to them that aren't actually based on the person that he was inspired by. So they're analogous to the person he's referencing. So someone like Margot Robbie, who's playing Nellie Leroy, is actually based on Clara Bow, but she's not named Clara Bow, right? And so
Yeah.
Paul Thomas Anderson does a lot of that as well, where he'll take a figure that he's inspired by that actually exists, but then brings them into his universe and then changes their name and uses them as a stand-in for that person, or a monolith, a representation of who he's referencing. And that way you can kind of, narratively play with the
Yeah,
structure or the
creative
character arc
liberty
a
of
little
like
bit.
kind of, yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's a lot of that. And then with the Singing in the Rain stuff, like thematically and story wise, it's very similar with the change of the tide. I mean, the artist did a little bit of that as well. But the other elevator pitch that you could do with this is that it's the Babylon is the artist, but if it fucked. And this is one of those movies that does feel like Damien Chazelle is kind of going for broke in a lot of ways, and not in a desperate kind of sweaty way that a lot of the characters are, especially with the turning of this new technology being introduced. But Chazelle, after making La La Land, with First Man, not being the success it was, but having the cachet of winning the directing Oscar at such a young age, and being able to have the keys to the kingdom, First Man not doing as well. And now with Babylon, it almost kind of feels like, okay, well, if I'm not going to be able to make this kind of movie ever again, I might as well
Let's
put
throw
all
it
my
all out there,
chips
yeah.
in and
Mhm.
just go for it. And he does. I would say my biggest negative towards the film is that even though it is a very chaotic movie, it is a very kind of grandiose and gaudy and grotesque film, it's still
Yeah.
very controlled. You look at someone like, another comparison is someone like Francis Ford Coppola, who after making The Godfather had basically a blank check to do whatever he wanted, even though he put a lot of money, his own money, into making Apocalypse Now. But the making of Apocalypse Now is just as interesting as the film itself, and it's almost as lurid and dangerous as the film. Where Babylon, what's being depicted on screen is salacious and vivacious, but it's not like you feel like everybody's safe making the movie,
Sure.
like it's very controlled. I mean, yes, the pandemic is still going on and there are rules and regulations that they were going about, but when you see the behind the scenes of Apocalypse Now, you start to worry about, like, oh my god, like people were having heart attacks, they were killing real bulls in the making of this thing. Like, people were actually in danger. You never feel that
So
with
you don't think that elephant actually shit on those people at the beginning, or?
no, I don't. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a controlled chaos in all of this,
Sure.
and I kind of, it's like, look how flashy this is and how out of control this is. But then you go and look at movies like, even like Fitzcarraldo, or Sallow, or something like
Is
that,
that
and it's
just a
like,
sign of
that's
the times though, where everything's a little bit more controlled now? Like, I just
no,
feel
it is.
like it.
And
Yeah.
it's still a really good movie, and I still really love how outlandish it is, and how, again, like, just it's swinging for the fences, but
It
at the same
doesn't seem
time,
spontaneous. I agree with you that
yeah.
it does feel like this is very much my vision, and like you can tell that in the cinematography and like the lavish kind of like big set pieces, even of the movie making, right? Of just like
Yeah.
that kind of showing the big. I don't know. There's a couple really great sequences. There's one where they're shooting a big war epic where they run out of film as they're shooting. This is the scene with Spike Jonze's character,
Who's a
where
stand-in for
man,
Eric von Stronheim, the director of Greed, and who is in
yeah,
Sunset Boulevard, basically.
yeah, and then Manny has to go get some more film, so it does a cutting back and forth of Manny going to this film and them trying to not lose the sunlight of this one sequence. Then there's another sequence with Margot Robbie's character when they are transitioning over to sound, which I think Eric you mentioned when after the movie, and I completely agree that I think it's one of the best scenes in the film that really kind of captures that transition from silent film to talkies and how the actors and all the crew were adjusting to that, and it at times is anxiety inducing. I think especially in that moment, and I think that is one of the best sequences, and there's multiple times of that where it reminds me of, yeah, in a PTA movie when you're looking for like a really great, that one shot or something like that. Like this movie has those moments that aren't necessarily like uh look at how elaborate this one shot is, but it's just a sequence, and the editing and the repetitiveness, especially of that sequence with Margot Robbie and the sound that is that controlled chaos, but isn't on that vile sex and drugs and violence side of thing. It is on the movie making side, and then that's the stuff that I really loved as well.
It's all about frustration in that sequence. Like you're watching it, and it's something that is, what is being depicted on screen or what is being shot is a moment that is so simple. Somebody comes into a room and puts their briefcase down, says a line, moves to the phone. The blocking is just, it's very typical of an introduction sequence to
If you're looking at it
establish.
from our eyes today, yeah.
Yes, but even filming it,
Sure.
without, like, if you remove the sound component, like if they were shooting this,
Yes. Yeah.
without sound, but now they have to incorporate that. It goes from what should be a very simple task to extremely frustrating to life threatening. And it's
Yeah.
one of those things where, like, it escalates in a manner that felt almost like a scene in Uncut Gems, where something as simple
Yeah.
as, a security device not working in a moment and a door not working or opening
Yeah.
properly becomes, the antithesis of the scene, and you become almost, you're on the edge of your seat, but not in a suspenseful manner. You're on the edge of your seat because you can't relax. You're at a moment of complete and utter just tension and anxiety, and you're waiting for that release. And Chazelle toys with you in such a perfect manner, and the way that Robbie, it's also hot in this studio because they have to turn the air conditioning off, because
Because of the
just even
sound.
the
Yeah.
smallest sound will have to get them to start back from the first take again. They can't just simply keep going and fix it in post, because it's live to record.
In
And
the
so,
early days of everything. Yeah.
yeah, and so that sequence is just like, you take that
It's
alone
perfect.
out
It's
of the
great. Yeah.
movie is an amazing piece of direction. It's also showcasing not only, the early adoption of technology and how sensitive it is, but it's also showing you who's in control of that scene, because you have Olivia Hamilton directing the scene. And this is another thing that's really important about this movie, is it's showing you this was a time when women and people of color had more control. And going back to the Boogie Nights comparison, the people in the adult industry were always looked down upon because it was a lower form of entertainment, or was kind of not even considered entertainment. So when, you know, Hollywood was in its infancy, a lot of people looked at it as a lower form of the arts, or not even that, right? So people that were not afforded opportunities elsewhere were able to make a living making movies. And so you had people in real life like Mary Pickford, or Alice Guy Blanche, or Oscar Michaud, making movies, whether it be in the studio system or independently outside. And then as soon as you know, silent era cinema and into the talkies started making money, men came in and took over again
Took
and
over,
said that
yeah.
this is ours now because it is
We see what it can
profitable
do. Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
lucrative. And I think that that's a really interesting point, because there's there's a lot of issues with the industry even now, even more so than there was in the 1920s and 30s. But you see at the beginning of that time that for all the problems that there were at that point, there were also moments of progress in that period before
Yeah.
capitalism takes over. And I think that that's another important underlining thing where, like, again, like, you have Diego Calva, who, a lot of people will be introduced to him for the first time in this movie as the lead. He's the grounding force of this film, but he
He
still
is,
has
yeah.
that wide-eyed kind of, I love the movies as much as him falling in love with Margot Robbie's character as Manny Torres, and him wanting to become sort of, a behind the scenes sort of player and a studio exec and working for Kinoscope. And so his progression is really interesting, and it's almost like Margot Robbie and Diego Calva split the difference in the Dirk Diggler kind of
Yes,
protagonist
absolutely.
storyline, where they're
Yeah.
kind of almost both those characters, because they're coming in at a point where they're, still fresh or new to the industry, where you look at someone like Brad Pitt's character Jack Conrad, who's this movie matinee idol, already well established, but also at a period of time where
Yeah.
he's having trouble adjusting to the talkie period. So,
And
there's a and
him getting older and him kind of not being, the guy anymore.
yeah, and feeling, and again, like, I think this is one of the few movies that kind of looks at ageism in an interesting way, because it's almost like it's saying that, oh well, you're yesterday's news in a lot of ways,
There's a great scene with Gene Smart, who plays a
gossip
tabloid,
columnist.
yeah, gossip columnist, and great scene with Gene Smart and Brad Pitt. I think one of the better kind of monologues that is sort of spoon feeding you what the movie's saying about chewing you up and spitting you out in Hollywood, but I thought was executed so well with Gene Smart of just delivering this to Brad Pitt and him finally going like fuck like
Yeah.
in that sequence, and finally kind of understanding what was happening to him and what Hollywood kind of does even then, and still to this day kind of still does, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, then it was okay. Well, you're not, connecting with an audience with the new technology, and this is in general. This isn't even just in the last 40, 50 years, but you look at, like, even women getting
Yeah,
to a certain age and being kind of cycled out of the system and thrown to
totally,
the
yeah.
side. And it's making a point there with how a lot of these people made their livelihoods on this, and they didn't know where else to turn, and there was a lot of depression and suicide and just issues of where do you go, because you're basically, you still are capable of making movies, you still are capable of coming to set, even though a lot
But
of
are you
these.
okay with the types of movies that you're making now, or the roles that
Yeah,
you're
and
getting?
I think, again, like, we've gotten to this place where now comeback narratives are very common. There's this thing where, if you haven't seen an actor, I mean, Brendan Fraser is that this year
Is
with
the
The
one now,
Whale
yeah.
in a lot of ways, but there is this thing where, a new generation of filmmakers comes in, and this wasn't at the time because it was at the beginning of it all, but a new generation of filmmakers that maybe grew up with the past generation of films that they watched, bring back those actors that they love in roles that you know give them that new boost. Again, going back to Boogie Nights with someone
Yeah.
like Burt Reynolds, who,
Yeah.
at that period of time was, kind of considered a 70s has been, and then gets put in this role as a porn director and producer, and it kind of revitalized his career. And even Tarantino, with John Travolta.
Yeah,
So
Travolta, yeah.
you look at that and kind of, that's the one thing that Gene Smart doesn't really talk about, because it hadn't really come across yet at that
Yeah.
point. And then
Yeah.
also, again, you have, someone like Jovan Adepo, who's playing a trumpet player, and
Yeah.
he's brought into the system as, he's a musician first and a movie star second. And again, it's kind of looking at how exploitative and also disgusting the industry treats him. And there's this moment that uses blackface that is very uncomfortable and disturbing. But I think again, it's needed to show that you have to take the good with the bad. You have to look at, I mean, even today there are still people using blackface, and it's just like, what are you doing? I mean, our own prime minister, has been
Yeah.
called out on garbage like that. But at the time that this
Even
is
in the movies,
depicted,
like I know I was
that
talking with
was
Nevis, was a
yeah, no,
normal
that was a
thing, right?
common
Yeah.
common thing, especially white actors, playing African American leads
Well,
or
there's even the
Asian
conversation with
leads.
Avatar right now too,
Yeah,
right? Like I don't want to get into it, but of cultural appropriation with Avatar, and like even though they're alien blue cat people, of just like where Cameron and that whole team took their stories from and created the Navi, and you have white actors playing, and doing accents and just everything that they've taken from the Navi. It's still happening even in like major, and there's more of a conversation there, so we won't get into it here. But then Zoe Saldana, even in the Nina Simone movie, I remember talking like there was a controversy there too of her, darkening her skin for that role, which reminded me of this. So it's like, and that movie was pretty recent, right? Like, and it's not necessarily our place to talk
no,
about some of those things, but
but it is
it's
brought up
just,
in the film, and it's a part of
yeah. Well, I'm
the
just saying, and it's still
industry.
happening, or those
Yeah,
conversations are still happening. It doesn't mean what's right, what's wrong, and people take roles and do things for different reasons. But this movie depicts that in the 20s of this being such like a normal thing, and even like someone who just has to darken their skin to fit in with the rest of the band, and it is disturbing, and it is I think necessary to talk about. It is kind of like a B or C plot in the movie, the whole that storyline, but I think it's still, there's so much in here that I still think that it's definitely handled well and all kind of comes together properly. But yeah, there's so much, like you forget that like Catherine Watterson's in this movie, Olivia Wilde is in this movie, Flea
well,
is in this movie.
you have four actors from The Wolf of Wall Street and two
Yeah,
from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and it's just kind of like it's yeah. There's so many people and so much going on, and so many plot lines that you're following, and that core group of characters. Like even someone like Lee Jun Lee,
yeah,
who I think is underwritten in some regards, brings
I
more to
agree.
the role than what's there, and you feel like, oh
I'm
man, I would love
surprised
to
My
see a
Girl's
whole.
Pussy didn't get nominated for best
Well,
song.
it can't because it's based on
I
a
I know,
pre-existing
I'm
song,
just,
but like she is so good in this movie that you kind of wish either Chazelle gave that character more
more to
depth
do.
or more
Yeah,
time, or like you'd love to see another film with her, because her story feels like it hasn't finished yet, and
yeah,
she's also a surrogate for Anna May Wong, who is the first kind of sort of superstar Asian American actor in Hollywood. And so again, like there's so much to kind of contend with when you're watching this movie, that the first time you do watch it, I think you're kind of blown over by the
oh
sheer
yeah.
spectacle of it all, that you need time to process it and kind of think about it afterwards, and
I've
then
been wanting to see it again, like, and it's playing in 70 millimeter at Varsity in Toronto. So
of
anyone who
course it
lives in
is.
Toronto, go see it in 70 mil at Varsity. That's what I will be doing next week after in the little Christmas break, because I've wanted to watch it again and again. I said I tried watching it with my wife on an award screener, but I she was not having it, so we turned it off, which is understandable. I just think it's going to be one of those movies, like even seeing someone like Jeff Garland in the movie, who has been removed from other things recently, so I was surprised that they would keep him in this. But we talked about like him playing a studio executive, and also resembling Harvey Weinstein as well,
Weinstein,
that it
yeah.
just like, it kind of almost, I understand keeping him in the movie in that role. Like, not that I'm condoning, Jeff Garland at all, and like his role probably could have been easily, removed or anything like that. But it's almost like that weird meta thing of just being like, okay, shitty dude playing shitty character. Okay, I guess we can maybe leave this in because there's some commentary there as well. Not that in the future, you hope that he doesn't work with them or anything, but I just love seeing Flea pop up and stuff too, and play Flea playing a studio executive. I'm like, hell yeah.
Well, that's also
Uh,
interesting casting because again, Flea and Spike Jones are guys that are outside, when they started their
yeah,
own careers, they were outside of the industry. They were independent, of being
yeah.
uh, Red Hot Chili Peppers, but also with Spike
As,
Jones, being a
as being a
skateboarder
skateboarder, yeah,
and then kind of being, a part of the Jackass crew and then becoming an independent filmmaker and music video director. And he was those guys are always outsiders looking in, and then to see them in this movie being, established, industry types that are controlling the facets of what's going on behind the scenes. And even there's such a great little subtle moment, and the movie doesn't have many of those, where you see, you know um Diego Calva's character having kind of risen through the ranks, and it's during the sound recording sequence or afterwards where he's taking a smoke break, and Flea's character, who Manny, Diego Calva's character, used to work for, sees him again. And he, as soon as he sees Flea, he puts out the cigarette and kind of stands in a kind of attentive kind of like,
yeah.
I'm ready to, do whatever you tell me to do, in that kind of authoritative way. So it kind of shows the respect and fear that Flea's character in this movie, um extrapolates in that way. So like those things I really love as well. And again, like, you're looking like that fine we didn't talk about it much and we don't want to spoil it, but that final act as well, I think, is truly some of the most daring. Like, it could be easily, brushed off as pretentious if you don't like it, but like what it does in this final moment. And again, it goes
At the
back
theater, is
to,
that what you're talking about?
yes, with La La
Yeah,
Land and Whiplash, and how Chazelle is able to kind of, sum a movie up pretty well and kind of leave you on
I
a,
loved
a
it,
high
but yeah, I
note.
understand someone would roll their eyes at it, but yeah.
I'll just say this: it's the best Avatar movie this year.
I love it, and the movie's out now, so like we didn't say it's filled with spoilers, but I'm sure anyone listening to this maybe has gone to see it, but and I won't spoil it, but yeah, that last sequence in the theater, which we've already touched on, singing in the rain and everything as well, but like it's very on the nose. It's very again, like you said, there's not much subtlety in this movie, which I'm kind of okay with like lately. Um down with subtlety. Just give me blatant in your face
Get down with the
maximalism.
subtlety.
Um, yeah, I love that last sequence. Like again, I was kind of in awe of the movie, and I'm excited to watch it again and watch it on film. And didn't talk much. Toby Maguire rules in this as well. That whole sequence is just very weird and
Well,
perfect.
again, it's been compared to Alfred Molina and
Um,
Boogie Nights, and
exactly.
Tobey
There's
Maguire
so
is
much Boogie Nights in this.
Toby Maguire is such an interesting guy as well, because you hear about his reputation outside of, him as an actor, and like the depiction of him in even Molly's Game, right? The version of him that Michael Cera played is kind of like that, assholish celebrity poker player, and the kind of guy
Yeah.
who like literally destroys other people's lives. And then you watch this and you're like, man, Toby Maguire's got to be twisted.
No, he
He's
definitely is, dude. You can see it. Like he both seems like a nice guy and someone who fucking hates everything, right? Like, and I feel like he's perfect in this. And like, yeah, every time you kind of see him outside of everything, like his dealings with the paparazzi, and I kind of appreciate him for all of that. But then you see him like popping up at showings of Babylon and giving people like champagne in the crowd and stuff like that this past weekend. Or
Never
yesterday, I
thought I'd
guess, when
be
the film
afraid
opened.
of Toby Maguire, but this movie will make you fear the man.
Have you watched any of those videos of him dealing with paparazzi? I'm afraid of that guy too, man. Like just
Yeah.
his death stares and him just going like, don't fuck with me. Like is like, oh, this guy has a temper. And in this movie, it's captured in his eyes and the bags that they put in his eyes and like how his makeup is done, I think is just like so perfect. But yeah,
Well,
I think
you
the
said
movie's a
this as well. You said this as well coming out of the screening, and I keep thinking about it as well. It's basically Boogie Nights, but if Stefan was telling you about it from SNL, right? Where
Oh yes, thank you. I forgot what I tweeted, but I
like
said like
the Stefan
Stefan.
version would be Stefan would be the Tobey Maguire character telling
Oh,
you this, because it kind of
absolutely,
feels like
yeah.
Tobey Maguire is almost based on Stefan.
Playing Stefan. No, and that's what I mean. I said if Stefan directed a fucked up version of La La Land, is like this movie has everything. Elephant shit, a woman peeing on a fat guy, is like an underground sex dungeon cave, is like Spider-Man with as a heroin addict or whatever, is just like list out any wild thing, and this movie has it. So that's what it kind of reminded me of right after, is like New York's hottest club is Babylon. It's like
But it's
it
in
has
LA.
everything. Yeah.
And we have a
LA's
chained
hottest club would
gator.
be perfect. Yeah, there's so much in this movie, and
Like it feels like it
again,
does become Barbarian at one moment.
it
Speaking
really
of that
does.
movie.
And I love it, but I understand if you don't. I'm gonna give the movie a 4.5. I really, really liked it a lot.
I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5, but that could go up on a rewatch. And again, like it is also very obnoxious, but I think it's the
Oh,
kind of
totally.
obnoxious that works for the tone of what the movie is depicting. And there's also kind of it's the rise and fall narrative, so there are a lot of scenes where the party's over and things kind of get a little bit more depressing. But overall, I think it's well balanced, and it's again like it's one of those movies you need to see to believe, and you need to see it on the big screen.
I agree with that. Again, go see it on film. I'm sure most major cities are having that 70 millimeter. I don't know. I'm just saying that, but like it doesn't happen very often, and Paramount hasn't really done anything on film in recent memory, from my understanding. So I'm not surprised, but also thrilled that they're putting this on 70 millimeter in certain theaters, because it does make sense with the look of the movie and the time period and everything like that. Like, and just how lavish and grand it is, that I think seeing it on film will be awesome. So I'm excited to do that. Thank you all.
City of
This will
Snorts.
I think we'll have one more podcast. I know we didn't talk about Justin Hurwitz's score that much, but I did say it was fantastic. I really,
Yeah.
really do think it's great. Um, he just, do you like jazz? One more podcast before the end of the year. Eric and I, next week, will be doing our most anticipated films of 2023. So that'll be on our main show, which is Untitled Movie Podcast. You can get that on all podcast services, YouTube, One Stop Shop over on Letterbox, which is Untitled underscore movies. We have a couple more reviews. It's been a little slower at the end of the year, but we do have some stuff up. We have Avatar: The Way of Water, which I have seen twice now. I did go see it again. We might be doing another kind of conversation about Avatar, maybe at the beginning of next year, or maybe next week. We'll see. Also, Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special, Bones and All. We did our best movies of 2022, which is actually probably something you guys should go check out. Babylon's featured. Um, Avatar is not, but Tar is, and RRR. So go check that out, which was our last week's episode, which is 140 of the Untitled Movie Podcast. Quickly on Avatar, looks way better in a consistent frame rate. Saw it in 24 frames per second. It looks great. And Eric, I put on Gemini Man the other day.
CFR,
The
consistent frame rate.
Yeah, I put on Gemini Man the other day just because I was like, I just want to. What does consistent HFR look like again? Because I know I hate it, but I put on the 4K Blu-ray just to see 60 frames per second, and oh my, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it so much. Where
Yeah,
if
it's bad.
and I know people are reluctant to change, much like what this movie is kind of depicting from, silent era to talkies, and people compared the transition to 3D, which didn't work out, and now with this high frame rate business, I'm like, it doesn't look good, and you're all
No.
crazy. Like, anyone who says it looks good, I will fight you. I will fight you. I hate it. I hate it. It looks so weird. But anyways, Babylon's good. Thank you all. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. Happy Kwanzaa. Is that how do you say happy
Yep.
Kwanzaa? Is that like forget what other holidays. If I'm missing your holiday,
Festivus.
please. Festivus, anything you celebrate. I hope you're spending time with family and having a great time. I know this movie is vile and crass, but I'll end it on a, a positive note. Happy holidays, and thank you all for your support this year. We'll have one more episode, like I said, next week, which is our most anticipated films of next year. Should be a fun one. You can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Eric Marchin. You can find more of my video reviews and interviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene. I actually had a chance to talk to Diego Calva for 4 minutes, so you can
There
go
you
check
go.
that out. But he was very nice, and I'm really excited to see where he ends up next, because I think the guy is a genuine movie star. And you can follow me on all the social medias at EM6211. And I just wanted to wish Matt and Matt's family a Merry Christmas, and thank you so much for everything that you do, Matt, because without you, this show would not be possible at
Same
all.
to you.
So,
Same to you, my friend. Same to you. Until next time.
Muppet Family Christmas is the best Muppet Christmas movie.
I hate you. I hate you.